Perfection. By mistake, I put the title from perfection to imperfection. That's very easy to accomplish. It's the imperfection to perfection is the challenge. We discussed how important it is not just to believe in Mashiach. And by the way, when I say Mashiach, it's a word that has a lot of different parts to it. Mashiach means the person, the leader. Mashiach refers to the age, the Messianic age, and everything that will happen then. So when I say Mashiach, it's a code word for the entire subject of Mashiach, of redemption. So not only do we have to believe in the coming of Mashiach, but we also have to anticipate it, wait for it, and show an eager desire to have it come so that the world will be redeemed. Now, how do you generate anticipation for something? How do you generate a desire for something? You have to understand how good the thing is that you want people to desire. So it's important that we focus on not only what the redemption will bring about, what kind of changes in the world in general, but we have to also discuss how it will be something that we will all desire, something that we want desperately, and therefore we're building up this tremendous sense of anticipation, of yearning for this age. I once heard someone, actually it was a person who was very much steeped in Judaism, who said this very, I think, bizarre thing, which is totally wrong, that he doesn't want Mashiach to come for himself. Because I have a good life, he said. I have a nice family, I make a good living, I study Torah, so I'm spiritually and materially in good shape. I need Mashiach for other people. For me, it won't really make a difference in my life, but there are people who are suffering from poverty, from illness, persecution. So I want it for them, for the collective. And it's so wrong to assume that Mashiach is good for everybody as a general category of people collectively, but for the individual, I could live without it. And that's exactly the point that I want to try to highlight, how wrong that approach is and what the right approach is. Mashiach is not just the liberator of the Jewish people and of the whole world, for that matter, but he's also the liberator of every individual Jew and every individual period. There's a quote in the book of Isaiah in which the prophet, speaking in the name of God, you will be gathered up one by one, O children of Israel. And Rashi, in his commentary on the Torah, says that it's as if God will take every Jew by his hand and take him or her out of exile. That means redemption is not just a collective thing, it's not just a national or international thing, it is a very personal thing to each and every individual. God will take us out of our own personal exile, and everything will be better for all. That's the basic premise of our discussion today. There are people who are afraid of change. People are comfortable with the status quo because that's the situation that they're accustomed to, that they're familiar with. And whenever you talk about changes, especially when you talk about cataclysmic changes, some people are fearful. So I want to just dispel the fear, if anyone still has that fear. The Rebbe once made it very clear that if you look at the way we write the word in Hebrew for exile, Gola, the word for redemption is Geula, If you read the Hebrew, I have it here on the sheet, for those who have the sheet in front of them, they are spelled exactly the same way with one small variation. Geula, redemption, has the letter Aleph. The letter Aleph is in bold print there. I made it in bold to emphasize it. The word Geula, redemption, has the letter Aleph in it. So the Rebbe explained what does that mean? That means that there's not going to be any real difference in our lives between Gola and Geula. And yet there will be an incredible difference at the same time. What does that mean? Everything, the way we know life today, the good parts of life, will still be around the way we are familiar with, but it'll have an Aleph inside of it. What does that mean? The Aleph stands for God. Aleph means master. Aleph is also one. The one and only master of the universe is inserted in the word that means exile. That means we'll have whatever we had before. If let's say you're an artist, you like to draw, that's your love in life, you'll still do that. If you like music, you'll still have that pleasure of music. If you're a doctor and you love treating patients, you'll have to adjust a little because people won't get sick. We'll discuss that soon. So you'll deal with preventative medicine. You'll tell people how to live a healthful life. You'll deliver babies. And you'll take care of people who are not necessarily ill but want to improve their health. There's no limit to how good one's health could be. In other words, whatever you do, if you're a lawyer, if you're a business person, whatever you do, you'll do it with much more feeling, much more depth, much more significance, much more spirituality, much more unity. But you're not going to all of a sudden wake up one day and discover a world that you're not familiar with. The world will be the same familiar world. It'll just get a lot better. When we talk about imperfection today, exile is compared to at least three things, probably more, but these are the three things that I want to highlight. It's sometimes referred to as a child in the mother's womb. What does that mean? It's potential, but it's not actual. There's a lot of potential that is in exile that we have that we can't manifest, that we can't express. That's not a good thing, because we know ourselves we have children, and we know they have a lot of potential, but because they got in with the wrong crowd and they don't express their potential, they don't actualize their potential, that's sad. That's why exile is a sad time to be in. Another metaphor that is used for exile is a dream. A dream is not reality. It's virtual reality. And the world today is like going crazy for virtual reality. The more we become sophisticated scientifically, the more we get away from real reality. If you listen to, what's his name, the guy who needs a little bit financial support, the one who owns Tesla.
Elon Musk.
Elon Musk. So he wants to bring the world to a place where everything is virtual reality. I don't know if that's all he wants to do, but that's one of his goals, to live in a fake world. We're living in a dream-like existence. And we have to wake up from that dream. Sometimes the dream is a nightmare, but even if it's a pleasant dream, it's not reality. And then the third metaphor for exile is illness, sickness. What does that indicate? That we're deficient in something. There's a lot of deficiencies in our lives. Things are not the way they could be. Sometimes it's not just that we don't realize our potential, but there's some negative features to life. In Hebrew, the word for sick or sickness, illness, is chola. Chola is a sick person. The word chola adds up to 49. What do I mean by adding up to 49? In Hebrew, there are no numbers. in Hebrew, separate from letters. In Hebrew, you want to write a number. Of course, now in modern Hebrew, they do use numbers. But in biblical and post-biblical Hebrew, a number was a letter. So Aleph is 1, Beis is 2, Gimel is 3, and so on. So when you take the word chola, it adds up to 49. And what's the significance of 49? So the Talmud tells us, and the Zohar and the mystical teachers amplify this idea, that there are 50 gates, 50 portals, 50 gates of spiritual understanding. And when the Jews left Egypt, they were in the abyss. They had to climb the mountain, spiritually speaking, till they got to the 50th level 50 days later. But they had to count 49. They went through the 49 levels to reach the 50th level, which was given to them by God. So what does that tell us? That a person who has 49, pretty sophisticated achievement, reaching 49, the penultimate level, is still sick because they're deficient. They want the 50th level and they can't achieve it. That's what exile is. That even if you reach the highest possible level of a human being, 49 levels, you're still deficient. And the more you climb the ladder of perfection, the more you feel that you're deficient. If you are at level 1, you don't feel that deficient. You're satisfied with yourself. When you get to level 2, you're a little bit more sophisticated, so you feel the lack even more. The more sophisticated we become, the more we appreciate what we're missing. So ignorance is bliss, you could say. You can argue, but it's not really bliss because you're missing so much and you don't even realize it. That's what exile is. We're missing so much and we don't even realize it. But if you reach the 49th level, if you're on the level of a righteous, holy person, a Rabbi, and he is at the 49th level, it could be a she also could be at the 49th level, they feel it more than anyone else. Who feels the exile more than anyone? If you listen to the Rebbe speaking, you saw a man who was reached the zenith, you could say, of spirituality, and he was in pain for the suffering of the people, of the Jewish people, and of all the deficiencies in the world, and you could see he wanted the 50th level. I can't interpret everything he said, but this is a possible interpretation. The Rebbe would often quote the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman Leviadi, who used to say in the time of spiritual exhilaration, he would say, God, I don't want your paradise. I don't want your world to come. I want you. That was his way of expressing that he's not satisfied with 49. He wants the 50th level. And the Rebbe would repeat this hundreds of times. And as far as I remember, every time the Rebbe would say this, the Rebbe would start crying. And you could see, at least this is my interpretation of it, that the Rebbe was at level 49 and saying, I want 50. I want to have it all. I want redemption. And that's what we're missing when we're in exile. We know that at Mount Sinai, not only did they get the 50th level spiritually, but they were also physically healed. Moses, who had a speech impediment, lost his speech impediment at Mount Sinai, and so did everyone else. Because when you reach that highest spiritual level and you get good health, spiritual health, it translates in also physical health. Because the spiritual and the physical go in tandem, they go hand in hand. The only reason why it doesn't work that way today, some very nice spiritual people who are very sick and some horrible people who are very healthy, because exile created a misalignment between the spiritual and the physical. But the way things should be is when you reach that 50th level, there's an alignment between the spiritual and the physical, and that's going to happen in the Messianic age. Because when the Torah was given at Mount Sinai, there was a complete alignment between the heavenly and the earthly, but it was a temporary one. It was only for that moment. That experience of Sinai, which was the ultimate alignment of the divine and the physical, will become a perpetual reality in the Messianic age. And therefore, the physical and the spiritual will go hand in hand, and all the imperfections, the illnesses, will no longer be there, because we will have reached that point of that total alignment between the two. Someone once asked the Rabbi, when Mashiach comes, are we all going to be Jewish? Will all the Gentiles in the world convert to Judaism? And the Rebbe said, no. There's no need for that. Everything in the world will reach perfection. And when I say the word perfection, obviously in a spiritual vein, there's no such thing as perfection. Because God is infinite, so you can keep on climbing and climbing and climbing. I'm using the word relatively speaking. In the Messianic age, everything will be perfect. A rock will be a perfect rock, whatever that means. A plant will be a perfect plant. An animal will be a perfect animal. A human being will be a perfect human being. A Jew will be a perfect Jew. But you don't have to be more than what you are. Everyone has a purpose in this universe. And everyone's purpose is deficient in exile, and in the Messianic age, that deficiency will be removed. And whatever you are, whatever your potential is, you will have the opportunity and the ability to realize that potential. Now, it's obvious that when we realize our potential, we're going to act differently. And we're going to change. But it's going to be like a change that we experience from infancy through childhood to adulthood. If you ever told a 3-year-old child, you know what, in another few decades, you're going to be working 9 to 5, and you're going to be doing some very boring stuff in an office. That kid says, I never want to grow up. If a little child would be exposed to what he or she has to become when they mature, or they're going to go to school for 8 hours a day, they're not. But what happens to the child? Why does the child eventually become an adult? It's a child. An adult is really a child in which you insert adulthood. You put the aleph in Gola, it becomes Geula. You put maturity, education in a child, the child automatically matures and grows, and it's seamless. There's no such thing as one day a child wakes up in the morning and says, you know what, today I'm no longer a child, I'm an adult, and I have a different way of looking at things. It's a gradual, seamless process. And if you impose maturity on a child who's not ready for it, it'll be painful. There'll be resistance. In the Messianic age, we're not going to all become different people. We're not all going to become angels overnight. We're going to grow and mature. How fast it'll take, that's something that only Mashiach can answer. This year in particular focuses on the idea of wholeness, of perfection. This is a leap year. What is a Jewish leap year? The secular leap year is one extra day to February every 4 years. But the Jewish leap year has a much more significant function. It's a whole month, and we're entering into the extra month tomorrow night. Tomorrow night is Rosh Chodesh Adar, the first day of the month, the first day of Rosh Chodesh, of the head of the month of Adar. And this year we have 2 Adars. We have 2 Purims. The first month in which we have Purim, it's called Purim Katan, the miniature Purim, the micro Purim, and then the next month we'll have the macro Purim, the real Purim. Why do we have an extra month? Because there's a problem with our calendar. The Jewish calendar is a lunar calendar. A lunar month is 29 and a half days. So you can't have a half a day, so you have 1 month 30 days, another month 29 days. If you add it up, 6 times 30 is 180, 6 times 29 is 180 minus 6. So that gives you 354. That's 11 days short of a solar year, which is 365. So what would happen with Passover? Passover occurs, let's say, sometimes in April. In 9 years from now, Passover would come out, how many days? 11 times 9, 99, 3 months plus earlier. It would be in the winter. And it would really go around the whole cycle of the year. But the Torah says Passover is Chag HaAviv, is the spring holiday. It's a spring holiday. So how do we correct that? So Judaism has an answer. We add on another month. Within every 19-year cycle, you add on an extra month. 7 times out of 19 are leap years. And this year is one of them. So that's why you often hear people say, this year the holidays are coming early, the holidays are coming late. Because it floats around the solar cycle, and then when we adjust by adding another month, the holidays come later. So what does that have to do with what we're talking about? What that has to do is the idea that there's a discrepancy between the sun and the moon. The sun is the symbol of God's light. The moon is the symbol of the receiving of God's light. And there's a discrepancy. There's a disparity between them. And when we have a leap year, we make the year complete. In the Talmud, a leap year is called a complete year, a perfect year, because the sun and the moon are no longer disparate. There's much more to this. In Kabbalah, we're told that the introduction of the potential for evil came into the world when God created the sun and the moon. And both the sun and the moon were equal in light. And the moon complained to God, we should have one powerful source of light, not two. So God says, okay, you diminish yourself, become smaller. And the moon became smaller than the sun. There's a spiritual meaning behind that, which we're not going to go into. Kabbalah has a lot of emphasis on that. But that diminution of the moon was considered to be the first potential for the ability for humans to fall. And that ultimately caused the sin of the tree of knowledge, and it brought evil into the potential for evil into the world. And in the Messianic age, that's going to be corrected. The moon and the sun will gain parity. So what I'm trying to say is that this year is a year that emphasizes the idea of wholeness, of completeness, of the sun and the moon coming together, the Jewish calendar being a complete year. What's imperfect about our world? A lot of things. We have wars. We have hatred on a personal level. People have hate for one another. You have envy. These are very negative traits and phenomena. You have dishonesty, deception, hypocrisy, inconsistency. We have hedonism, people who are obsessed with pleasure, physical pleasure, inflated egos. What is the underlying cause of all these negative things? The underlying cause is that God's presence is hidden from us. If someone would be aware of God's presence, not just pay lip service to it, which we do when we pray, but we would really feel God's presence, we wouldn't be able to do all these things. And a simple analogy would be, if someone is ready to do something improper, and someone who you respect walks into the room, you won't do it. You know, the famous story is told about Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev. It was told about other rabbis as well, but it happened to several of them. They were traveling when one of the coach drivers saw some luscious fruits hanging over the fence. They would belong to a private owner, and he was about to grab the fruit, and the rabbi said, he's watching, and he desisted right away. He pulled back his hand, and he turns around and he says, I don't see anyone watching. He says, God is watching. He was ready to stop theft, thinking that a person, a human being, was watching him. How much more so if you know God is watching you? And yet we still do things that are improper, present company excluded, of course, because we are not aware in a real, meaningful way of God's presence. So that breeds all sorts of vices and all sorts of problems that society is beset with. The Messianic age will remedy that, not by tackling each one of these traits and giving us counseling. Well, you shouldn't fight with one another, you shouldn't hate one another. It'll come automatically. Once God's presence is fully revealed in the world, you won't want to hate someone, because you will look at the other person whom you hate and look at the divine spark in him or her. You won't see the negative, you'll see the positive, because God's presence will open your eyes to see reality. You know, next to the last plague in Egypt was the plague of darkness, and the Torah says one could not see his brother. That was right before the Exodus. And it's a metaphor as well. Sometimes there's such darkness in the world is shrouded in such darkness that you can't even see your own brother. You don't recognize that this is your brother, and this is someone who you really should be loving. But because of the darkness in the world, now it doesn't mean there aren't evil people in this world, but we're talking about how there's hatred even between good people, decent people, normal people. We're not talking about the mass murderers of the world. We're not talking about the most evil people. We're talking about the hatred that exists only because we're judging that person based on the person's externality, not based on the person's reality, which will be remedied in the Messianic age. But let's talk a little bit another type of imperfection, another set of imperfections. In our society, if you think about it, how much time is spent on waiting? You wait, okay, you go to the doctor, you wait, I don't know, sometimes it could be an hour, 2 hours. You go to the store, you're waiting online to get the checkout. But that's what you sleep 8 hours a night, hopefully. You're waiting to get up the next morning and do something. When you're sleeping, you're not doing anything. Much of life is about not the present moment. It's about what you're going to do next. While you're doing one thing, you're thinking about the next thing. You know, there's a big thing nowadays about living in the moment. That's a Jewish concept. The previous Rebbe's father, he was the 5th leader of Chabad, Rabbi Shalom Dov Ber, was at a gathering with his students, and he was ready to deliver his discourse. His discourses were known for their clarity and their depth, and this was like the highlight of the students' week. But before the discourse would be delivered, they would sing a very meditative tune. And the Rebbe detected that they were trying to sing the tune faster because they were eager to get it over with, the tune, and to hear the discourse. And the Rebbe gave a whole long talk how a person has to be. In Hebrew, the word is pnimi. Pnimi means inward. You have to be in something. You can't do A thinking about what you're going to do after you finish with A. You have to be totally present in that. But one of the casualties of exile is that we're always waiting, doing one thing, waiting for the next thing. Even when we're doing something productive that we waited for so long, we're already thinking about what are we going to do next. That's because we're not in touch with reality. To us, everything is superficial. Again, I'm generalizing. There are people who are above this, and people who could train themselves, but this is the default position, that people are not totally involved in what goes next. There's a good soup out there. Oh no, we're supposed to be thinking about what we're doing now. Another thing about living in exile is that we measure things by their relative value. How much is $100 worth? What kind of question is that? $100 is worth $100. No, it's not. If you're a billionaire, $100 is virtually meaningless. You wouldn't even pick it up if you saw a $100 bill on the ground. To an average person, $100 is a big amount of money, a large amount of money, and you would be you would be interested in seeing who this belongs to. Maybe it could be yours. Everything is judged by its relative value. Everything is, what's the price of gold? It depends on the market. Everything is judged by the market. Nothing is judged by what its true value is. The Messianic age will remedy that. We will see the intrinsic value of everything. Someone asked a question, one of my colleagues once in a Talmudic journal asked a very interesting question. The way you get married in Judaism is by giving a ring. A ring has to have value. If it's worth less than a penny, which of course I don't think is possible nowadays, but if something in the olden days when pennies were worth something, if something was worth less than a penny, you couldn't use it to get married. It has to be worth something. And in fact, when you ever go to a Jewish marriage, they will take the ring and they'll ask the witnesses, is this worth a penny? Or a Hebrew word, pruta. And they'll say yes, of course. In other words, you have to ascertain that it has some real value. In the Messianic age, when there'll be so much money around, everything will be in such abundance, gold won't have any value anymore. Because you'll have as much gold as you want, and everyone will have it. So it'll have no value. So how could you get married in the Messianic age? You give a gold ring, it has no value. And the answer is, it has much more value then, because then we'll see the intrinsic value of everything. Things have intrinsic value beyond what the market tells you how much it's worth. I'll give you a simple example. If someone who you love, an heirloom, that if you sell it on the marketplace, it's worth $5, but to you it's worth $1 million. You'd never part with it. Why? Because it has intrinsic value. It's not just the value in the market, but it's the value because there's something deeper to that object. In the Messianic age, we'll see the deeper value of everything. Another thing about living in exile, we got so used to finding ways of rationalizing pain and suffering. If you ever listen to any rabbi, one of the most commonly asked questions, how come there's negativity in this world? Why is there pain and suffering? And we go to great lengths to talk about pain and suffering and how to cope with pain and suffering, that we developed a whole philosophy of pain and suffering as if it's inevitable. And some people correctly look and to see the positive in the pain and suffering of their own pain and suffering. You never look for the positive in someone else's pain and suffering. You try to get rid of it and help them deal with it. But when you're dealing with your own pain and suffering, we look to find how it's cathartic, how it teaches us values and so on and so forth. So we got so used to expecting negativity in our lives. We got so used to expecting illness and poverty and all the other ills of society. This is life. This is the way it is. But that's not the way it is. It doesn't have to be that way. It only is that way because we're still in exile. The Messianic age will change that we won't have to deal with negativity anymore. Negativity will slowly disappear. It's not going to disappear all at once. It'll be a slow process. The Kabbalists explain how it works. When Adam and Eve partook of the forbidden tree of knowledge, what they did is to integrate evil with good. Because before the sin, the serpent was evil, outside force. Eating of the forbidden fruit brought evil into humanity. So everything that's good has a little tinge of evil in it. Everything that's evil has a little tinge of good. As we progress throughout history, doing more positive things, more mitzvahs, it creates a separation between the good and the evil. It's called the refining process. When you refine, you separate the negatives from the positive. And ultimately, when we reach the Messianic age, the negative and the positive will be as far apart and as separated as can possibly be. And after the Messianic age, gradually it'll become totally separate. So in other words, we can still see what evil is, but evil will become an outside thing. It's not part of our consciousness. It's like a person says, I hear there's a certain type of philosophy in some other part of the world. I know nothing about it. I'm not really interested in becoming part of that philosophy, but I'm curious. And you go to the library and you start reading up on that philosophy, and then it enters into your consciousness and it has an effect on your life. You don't have to go to the library. Nothing, it's just curiosity. So we'll have curiosity. We'll want to know what evil is. In fact, a time will come when that evil, since it doesn't have any connection to good, will fade away. Because evil can only exist when it's nurtured by good. And once the separation is complete, evil will just fall apart. And I always like to imagine this. Grandfathers will be sitting, or grandmothers will be sitting with their grandchildren, and the grandchild will say to their grandfather, Grandpa, what's war? And he says, well, yeah, when two nations fight with each other, they shoot guns and tanks. I said, shoot. Why would they shoot? It could hurt the other side. Well, they're enemies. What is an enemy? Oh, there's evil in this world. What's evil? And the grandfather is going to have a hard time explaining what that means because they will not have experienced that. We are in the best shape of any period in all of history. You know why? Because we're the transition period. We know what evil is, and we're going to see it fade away. We'll appreciate it much more. I remember when I first got my first computer, to me it was heavenly. To get a computer, you could actually, you don't have to put in the what do they call that? Whiteout. You could correct things. To me, it was heaven. Today, a kid doesn't know anything else. Never saw a typewriter. So we're in a very good position. Mashiach comes today. We will know what the past and the future. We are the linchpin between these two periods. So evil will disappear. So then the question is asked, and someone asked me this last week, says, then what challenges will there be? Isn't evil what challenges us? Okay, we don't mean evil, God forbid, a Holocaust or some mass murder, but there has to be something to make our lives interesting. If everything will be good and positive, our lives will be very boring, no? So the answer is, the same question is asked about a tzaddik, a righteous person who, according to the Tanya, is someone who got rid of their evil impulse. They're not attracted to evil, to immorality. So then what challenges do they have? And the answer is they have a lot of challenges. Because in good itself, there are so many different directions. For example, in Judaism, we have the things that we do with our mind, study of Torah. There are things we do with our heart. Prayer is a service of the heart. Helping other people is the heart. And then we have our physical component. Things that we do. So we're going to, let's say, get involved in a deep subject of Torah, and it's exciting. It brings us tremendous delight, and we're totally steeped in it. We're immersed in it. And all of a sudden, the bell rings. We have to go out and pray. We have to start using our heart. It's going to be very difficult. We don't want to go. We want to stay here. We love this learning this subject. We don't want it to end. And you have to break away from what you were doing, your passion, and to start praying and cultivating your feelings. And then someone tells you, stop praying. There's someone who needs your help, needs to repair a flat tire. Go out and help. But I'm not into flat tires. I'm a cerebral person. I'm emotional. There's not much excitement and feeling in repairing a flat tire. No, you have to break away from that and do that. And as you get excited about repairing a flat tire, it says, get out of there. You go back into and start studying again. And you keep on going. And of course, I'm only using 3 general directions, but life is filled with so many different directions that are positive and will constantly be pulled in every direction. And we're going to have to challenge ourselves by being able to tear away from what we're doing to engage in something that is the more important thing at that moment. So there will always be a challenge for us in the Messianic age, except it won't be the evil that we'll be fighting with. It'll be just going in different directions. The Rabbi once gave an analogy to that. When you're in space and there's a vacuum, there's no resistance. So how do you fly? How do you propel yourself in space? You have to shoot out in one direction, and it pulls you in the opposite direction. In other words, you can be when you're pulled in different directions, it propels you forward. When you're not in space, we have a lot of resistance. So that propels us. But when you're in space and there's no resistance, the resistance is the different directions in which you're being pulled. So the Messianic age will bring us a sense of unity, a sense of fulfillment of our potential, because one of the worst things, they say a mind is a terrible thing to waste. Well, a person who doesn't fulfill his or her potential is a terrible thing to waste, and that's what exile does to us. It distracts us and doesn't let us be who we are capable of being. It'll give us fulfillment, it'll give us meaning to our lives, and it'll allow us to see the positive in everything and in everyone. And that is something that we should yearn for, because you can't imagine anything better than that. And it's well overdue. It's well overdue. Any questions? Yes?
Will the curse of Adam and Eve be over in the Messianic?
Will what? Curse?
The curses with Eve.
Oh yes, absolutely. All the effects of the sin of the tree of knowledge, which is pain in childbirth and child rearing, all of that will disappear. Will it happen right away? Not necessarily. It's a process.
Would that include the thing that Adam was cursed at with the sweat of his brow?
Right.
Basically has to work, so people won't have to work anymore?
People won't have to work. They might want to work and do things because they enjoy it, but nothing will be forced on people. Ultimately, Maimonides writes in his very last paragraph of his magnum opus, the Mishnah Torah, he says, "At that time there will be no more problems in the world," I'm paraphrasing, "because the whole world will be filled with the knowledge of God, and our preoccupation will be to know God." Now, if I tell that to the average person today, so that's pretty boring. I mean, all day I'm going to sit and meditate on God. I don't think that's exciting. Don't worry. You're not going to be propelled into that situation without growing into it. That will become the greatest delight. Just like the child shouldn't be told what the child is going to have to do when they get older. They'll enjoy what they get when they get older. They don't enjoy it when they're a child. We are like children, and we're going to mature gradually. God will put that aleph into us and enable us to grow to higher levels without radical departures from who we are and what we were before. So there's not going to be anything unpleasant in this Messianic redemption. Yes?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up about Rosh Kodesh. A question. Since it's the first commandment that Hashem gave, and in the Torah, it's like, I think it's chapter 12, it's kind of introduced with Rosh Kodesh, but then revelation, formal revelation as presented in the Torah, seems to occur afterwards with the Ten Commandments.
Right.
So one question I have about Rosh Kodesh is that when we say revelation, even though it doesn't occur in the Torah's formal statement about revelation, is that considered, that first commandment, is that considered part of revelation?
Right. What happened at Mount Sinai, there were already previews of it before. The splitting of the sea was a preview of what was going to happen at Mount Sinai, the spiritual dynamic. And you're right that when they got the first commandment of establishing the Jewish calendar, which is based on the lunar months and the way the month begins by the sighting of the moon, that was like the first commandment they got as a people. That was preview, a revelation of what was going to come. Because that's what the whole Torah is about. The whole Torah is about the discrepancy between the sun and the moon and bringing them together, bringing unity when there's division.
Okay. So it sounds like you're saying that it's not part of Revelation, it's a preview.
Well,
But-
it is a little, preview means it's a little bit of that revelation.
Well, to me, one of the things that in Kabbalah, that, that Rosh Kodesh makes us the master of our own time. And if we're the master of our own time, to me, that's a reflection on what the Jews just went through in Egypt, where in slavery, they were the completely opposite.
Mm-hmm.
And Rosh Kodesh is a gift to the Jews, saying they are no longer slaves and they are their own masters under God. They're the masters of their own time under God. And true, they weren't ready and they had to march for 40 years in the desert because they weren't ready to completely handle that. But that was, to me, that's the opening of a revelation. He's telling the Jews, you are no longer slaves, you are now free
Guy's giving
men.
a mini lecture.
That's
Yes,
how I'm seeing that.
The suggestion was that the first commandment, which is declaring the new month, which is done by the Jewish people, not by God directly, but by God giving us the power to declare the new month, which means that we have the power, we control time even, is the antithesis of being a slave. Not only are we not a slave to any power in Egypt, we are the masters of nature. That's a very good point. Yes, that's true.
Another thing, in what you were just talking about in
He
regards
loves to
to
talk, this
the
guy.
coming of Mashiach,
I don't know what he's talking about.
in Kabbalah, I believe it's saying that we will have complete light from the moon. So
Yes.
we will have a full moon continuously.
Yeah, the moon will become like the sun, it says. Now, what does that mean in actual physical reality? I'm not equipped to say. We'll have to wait for it to happen. But it's interesting you mentioned about the moon. When I came to Australia as a student 50 years ago plus, I stayed with a rabbi there who told me that there was a new rabbi who was brought from I don't know where, but he became the rabbi of the largest synagogue in the Southern Hemisphere in Sydney, Australia. And the rabbi made it to the newspapers because he had an idea that he was proposing to NASA they should put mirrors on the moon. That way at night we won't need to illuminate the streets because they'll get the moonlight. So at his installation, the rabbi that I stayed with, Rabbi Abramson was his name, this is what he said. That rabbi's name was Joshua. He says, the Joshua of biblical times stopped the sun. Modern day Joshua wants to put mirrors on the moon. My suggestion is he should focus on educating Jewish children who are likened to the stars. I remember that from 50 plus years ago. So we won't have to put mirrors on the moon. The moon will reflect the sunlight in a way, in a moral sense, in a personal sense. Sun is the one who gives. The moon is the one who receives. When we receive, we're never on the level of the giver. There's always a barrier between the teacher and the student, the giver and the recipient. In the Messianic age, that will be healed. The giver and the recipient will be on the same level. Will reach parity. Any other yes?
So I've been told that all Jewish souls throughout time were all at Sinai.
Yes.
So that means that everybody, all Jewish people, temporarily have received that healing perfection because everybody was at Sinai. Is that correct?
Yeah, everybody got that potential, yes. But it after Sinai, people worshiped the golden calf 40 days later. It was a temporary thing. You were exposed to an experience, and then as soon as the experience ended, you went back to being who you were before.
Very human.
It didn't penetrate because they weren't ready for it. But at least they had the model of what the ultimate goal will be. Any other questions? Yes?
Is the Mashiach gender?
Mashiach is a man, yes. And Mashiach is the most discriminating position in the world because there's only one. It eliminates 7 billion plus people. So,
How do
it's like marriage. When you marry someone, you just discriminated against every other person in the world. Okay? But there's certain positions that can only be one. And it just so happens that one is a man who's a descendant of King David. That excludes a lot of people, a lot of men. In fact, it excludes all men except for one. There's only one qualified person in each generation.
how do people